hours, the leader of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, he's hit back at Henry Kissinger, who, of course, a part of the administrations well, going back to Richard Nixon. And Kissinger suggested Ukraine would, in the end, have to cede territory to Russia as the price of peace. Now, President Zelensky came back very hard and compared that suggestion to the appeasement of the Nazis. Now, what did you think of that? He was clearly aiming his remarks, wasn't he, at a wider audience in the West and the NATO alliance?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. You know, who knows where this will end up, but President Zelensky must continue to hold a really, really strong line here. And that is clearly what he's doing. And elsewhere, people can talk about pragmatism, but President Zelensky's people are in the fight. And he simply can't show that sort of ankle.
Indeed. And so far we've seen Zelensky holding very hard to that line. And the leader of Germany, Olaf Scholz, has been saying just in recent hours that people have to realize that Ukraine will not back away on this thing. But it does leave, I suppose, what do you think? Does it leave a pretty absolutist mission for Ukraine to drive the Russians off Ukraine altogether, including Crimea? Is that mission impossible?
I mean, it may prove to be so, but you can absolutely see it from President Zelensky's perspective that any Russian incursion into sovereign Ukraine, including the land that was ceded back in 2014, 2015, is intolerable to the state of Ukraine. So I have enormous sympathy with the line that he is taking. Now, downstream, of course, it may prove to be a fool's errand and more than he can militarily achieve. But politically, I think it makes complete sense for him to hold that line.
And meanwhile, the fighting goes on with increasing intensity. Now we're seeing, aren't we, Russia attacking 40 towns in the Donbass. They're relying very heavily, the Russians now, on heavy artillery from what we can see, and the constant missile and artillery bombardment of villages and towns, which that makes the conflict now in this region something of a gunfight, doesn't it? Does Ukraine, do you think, have the kind of firepower that it needs now?
Well, I mean, I think they would say, not unreasonably, they need more. There is no doubt that the Russians are really doubling down on them in a relatively limited geographical area, having been very significantly rebuffed in the north and elsewhere. And so it is getting really, really tough. And the Ukrainians, I think, not unreasonably, would say they need more firepower. I think we should continue to call out what the Russians are doing. As you say, they're using very heavy weaponry in built-up areas, indiscriminate use of fires, and they claim that they are doing it in a targeted manner. I mean, that is simply not the case. I have had the great privilege of being part of US-led coalitions in Iraq and Syria elsewhere, where we have used precision fires in a very, very precise manner in Mosul, in Raqqa, and elsewhere. That is simply not what we're seeing by the Russians.
Yes, it's not clear at all that Russia have the capacity for precision targeting, even if they wish to. Even the hypersonic missiles, I think it's said, are nothing like as accurate as they were cracked up to be, which maybe accounts for a lot of the buildings, civilian targets that have been hit, as well as a deliberate plan of razing areas to the ground.
Yes, I think that's right. There are absolutely two things there. There is the degree to which this is a deliberate terror tactic, and they have used that in other places, not least in Syria. You go back to Grozny and elsewhere, where there's a deliberate tactic to raze cities, towns, villages to the ground. But there is also the technical ability, the technology, but also the technical competence to conduct precision targeting. This is really advanced stuff, and the best militaries in the world can just about do it. What we are seeing in Ukraine is the Russians are not in that league.
No, so there's a constant struggle on both sides to bring the best possible weaponry and munitions to bear. But what about personnel? Because it seems, doesn't it, the Russians are now calling on veterans to sign up to the war effort on contracts, while quietly increasing mobilization of more greater mobilization of the general population. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, you have men and women fighting on the front line. I mean, can Ukraine keep up with the need to keep the supply, to put it crudely, supply of soldiers that they need?
Well, I mean, time will tell. There's no doubt that Ukrainians have far more fighters they can bring to bear over time. I think what we'll continue to see in these really really hard fights is that the value that Ukraine gain from defending their homeland is very very potent. We've seen the conscripts from Russia haven't really got the heart for it. And even if you bring in more experienced soldiers, to what degree are they really in this fight? And when we get into brutal gutter fights of closing out towns and cities, that will to fight is central.
Okay, retired Major General Rupert Jones, thank you for taking the podium in today's briefing room.